In this video, we'll be explaining why the cards exist on the ban list, going over some of the extra deck monsters, and starting off with Summon Sorceress. Summon Sorceress is a Link 3 monster, which simply requires 2 more monsters with the exact same type as its materials, except tokens. Although if you had tokens, you could convert them into Link Spiders and Link Karibos in order to get the same type of effect monsters on the field in order to go into Summon Sorceress. So this was a very easy restriction to get around if you wanted to abuse tokens. And Summon Sorceress has the effect where, when it's Link summoned, you can special summon a card from your hand to your opponent's side of the field, and also once per turn, you can target a face-up monster this card points to in order to special summon a monster from your deck with the same type as that monster to a different zone this card points to, but its effects are negated. So with its ability to special summon a card from your hand to your opponent's side of the field, you could just put it onto the field where Summon Sorceress points to on your opponent's side of the field, in order to more easily set up its ability to special summon a monster from your deck. Now, the ability to special summon monsters from the deck is pretty strong, and normally there's a whole bunch of restrictions on this because of just how game-breaking it is to an extent, where you're both able to search out the monster you need from the deck as well as getting it onto the field, which is like accomplishing 2 effects in one. So we have main deck cards like A Hero Lives, which has a whole bunch of restrictions where you need to have no face-up monsters on your side of the field, you have to pay half your life points, and you can only special summon a level 4 or lower monster, which is specifically from the Elemental Hero archetype, which is just like one of 6 different kinds of hero cards. So it doesn't even let you bring out the Destiny heroes or Vision heroes, for example, just the Elemental heroes. And A Hero Lives is so good it's currently limited to 1 copy, even with all of these restrictions. We have Wind-Up Carriers and Matey, which can only special summon a Wind-Up monster from your deck. MX Saber Invoker, which only allows you to special summon a level 4 Earth Warrior or Beast Warrior monster from your deck, and only exactly level 4 monsters. It's not even level 4 or lower like A Hero Lives. Guard Dragon Elpie only allows you to special summon dragons from the deck, and then Union Carrier only allows you to equip a monster from your deck to a monster. It doesn't even special summon it. And all 4 of these cards are banned because of just how good it is at doing those things, either within their respective archetypes, or because it just allows a whole bunch of other combos which weren't really intended. Summon Sorceress has none of these restrictions. There's literally no restrictions on the monster it can summon from the deck, except that it has to be the same type as the monster it points to. There's no level 4 or lower, being part of a specific archetype, or even restrictions on what you can do for the rest of the turn when you summon Sorceress. It does at least negate the effects of the monster it summons, but that's not really going to stop the card from being absolutely bonkers. Summon Sorceress' effect to special summon a monster from the deck is so good that it kinda blows all the other, much more specific special summons from the deck out of the water. And the fact that Summon Sorceress is also almost completely generic means the card absolutely saw tons of competitive play, and was included in pretty much any deck that can use it, because obviously it was. It is one of the most powerful effects in the game without any restrictions. There are 7 other extra deck cards on the ban list currently, which accomplish a similar thing except with way more restrictions. And that effect is good enough to be banned 7 other times. So you can kind of see why Summon Sorceress, who is a more powerful version of those cards, is also banned. Summon Sorceress is kind of like the pot of greed of extra deck monsters. Its effect is good in pretty much every deck, and is also really strong and easy to use. Its materials might as well be generic with how easy they are to get around. Summon Sorceress was banned in April 2019, about a year after it came out. Could Summon Sorceress be unbanned? No, it's too generically good. Even when the card first came out, everyone knew it would be banned eventually, and it was kind of an open secret to use the card as long as you could before it was eventually banned. And then when it was banned, no one was surprised. The card was most likely created overpowered on purpose though, in order to push the Link mechanic, as it was introduced very early on in the OCG, but about a 6-month delay before it was released in the TCG. Because you see, when the XC's monsters first came out, the first wave of them were pretty mediocre, and no one really took advantage of XC's monsters as much as Konami probably hoped they would, and just kept playing synchros. That was until they banned a whole bunch of really good synchro cards in support, and then released some overpowered XC's monsters to finally complete the transition, and get people to use the new mechanic. So nowadays, whenever they release a new type of summoning method, they usually print a couple of overpowered cards like Summon Sorceress in order to coerce people into actually using them, which is why no one is really surprised when cards like Summon Sorceress or Firewall Dragon get banned, and also why no one is surprised when they are obviously released broken, because otherwise it would be another repeat of the XC scenario, and people would just be upset at the new summoning method and just kinda stick to what they already know. How could Summon Sorceress be fixed to be unbanned? Well, two things really. Give it a restriction on level 4 or lower monsters only. I'm not sure what they were thinking allowing any level monsters to be special summoned from the deck, as most cards are kind of balanced around the fact that level 5 and higher monsters are much more difficult to search or special summon than level 4 or lower monsters. In addition, make it so the card it brings out is banished when it leaves the field instead of going to the graveyard, and that would probably be enough. It would still be strong getting a named level 4 or lower monster in the field, but would get rid of a lot of the floating effects or graveyard effects that are facilitated by Summon Sorceress. Next up we have Denglong, first of the Zing. This is a level 5 Synchro Tuner monster, which has completely generic materials, and has 3 separate effects. The first is, when this card is special summoned, you get to add a Zing card from your deck to your hand. Second, once per turn you can send a worm-type monster from your deck to the graveyard, in order to make this card's level equal to that monster's. So it mills the card from your deck as a cost. Lastly, if this card leaves the field, you can special summon a Zing monster from your deck. And it also has a restriction where you can only special summon this card once per turn, which means its other effects are only soft once per turns. Now, what's good about this card is that there is a negate within the Zing archetype called 9 Pillars of the Zing, which has the effect where, if a card effect is being activated and you control a Zing card, you can negate the activation and then shuffle that card back into your deck. Then you have to destroy one Zing card you control. So it's a full Omni Negate which spins the card back to the deck, which is one of the best forms removal by the way, because cards can't activate floating effects in the deck. And also it allows you to destroy Denglong, although Negate is only part of the reason Denglong is good. There's also a synchro monster called Herald of the Arc Light. This card has a floodgate effect on the field, where any monster sent from the hand or deck to the graveyard is banished instead. In addition, it has an Omni Negate, where if a card is activated, you can tribute this card in order to negate and destroy that card. And additionally, it can search out a ritual card when it's sent to the graveyard, which is irrelevant for how Denglong used it. The Zing archetype has a card called Chiwen, Light of the Zing, which is a level 1 tuner that has the effect where if a Zing card you control is destroyed while this card is in your graveyard, you can special summon it, but it's banished when it leaves the field. There's another Zing called Bian, Earth of the Zing, which has the ability that if it's used as a synchro material, the synchro monster that comes out is immune to being destroyed by battle. Additionally, it can also synchro summon as a quick effect during the main or battle phase. So, if you activate the Omni Negate 9 Pillars of the Zing, then use the cost of 9 Pillars in order to destroy Denglong on your side of the field, this will proc the effect of Chiwen in your graveyard to special summon itself, where you can then use Denglong's floating effect in order to bring out Bian. And if done during your opponent's turn, you can simply have Bian use its synchro summon effect during your opponent's turn in order to go into Herald of the Arc Light, where you then have a floodgate with an optional Omni Negate it can use once, that can't be destroyed by battle. Whereas usually, Herald of the Arc Light is very easy to beat over because it only has 1000 defense. This combo overcomes the biggest drawback, where you can just destroy the card by battle without having to deal with its Omni Negate. Not with Denglong though. Denglong was basically a way to convert any deck that can get out materials for a level 5 synchro monster into 2 negates on the field, thanks to 9 Pillars of the Zing and its easy access of Herald of the Arc Light, with its Chiwen and Bian combo. And dinosaur decks are able to accomplish this pretty easily thanks to Soul Eating Oviraptor. Soul Eating Oviraptor is a level 4 monster, which on summon allows you to take a dinosaur monster from your deck and either add it to your hand or send it to the graveyard. So if you simply choose Miscellaneous Saurus and send it to the graveyard, you can then use Miscellaneous Saurus' effect in the graveyard to banish itself in order to special summon a Dirac Alio from your deck, which is a level 1 tuner, which allows you to go into a level 5 synchro monster. And if you're just going to Denglong, you have 2 negates. So pretty much any deck that was able to supplement having 3 kinds of Zing cards in their deck, while accomplishing their goals like normal, could easily play the Denglong engine and just gain an immense amount of value from one synchro summon. And that's only one way the card was used. It was also used in some combos in other decks like Metalfoes or Zephyros. And also, the fact that this card just has a better floating effect than its archetype. Normal Zing cards only proc floating effects when they're destroyed by battle or card effects, and use a win effect, whereas Denglong's effect procs if it's just removed from the field in any way, and has an if clause instead of when. So, the card activates its floating effect if it's sent to the graveyard for a synchro or link summon, so you could use the fact that it's a tuner monster in order to go into another Zing card from your deck, basically turning the card into a +2 in card advantage if it just hits the field, and card advantage which could be turned into negates, which is even more important. Denglong was banned in September of 2017, after being used in a lot of topping decks with the new Dinosaur Structure deck. Could Denglong, first of the Zing, be unbanned? Probably. This card is currently unbanned in the OCG with a little problem. Although the OCG has a different metagame than we do, so that's not the biggest case to be made for cards in unbanned status. However, ever since 2017, the game has gotten way more easier to use negates that don't require you to play a whole bunch of garnets in your deck. Because Denglong is really good, but you have to set up your deck for it, and with quite a lot of cards too. The decks that could facilitate his combos are definitely getting a lot of advantage out of it, but not every deck can make use of its advantage, because they just can't play a whole bunch of Zing cards in their main deck. Or they probably wouldn't want to if they could just use something like Appaloosa Bow of the Goddess or Borreload Savage Dragon instead. Although just because it wouldn't be useful in every deck doesn't mean it's not still really good advantage. It's kind of like a less advantageous Ib the World Chalice Justiciar, who is able to go +2 on a generic level 5 Synchro Summon as well. Although, it was also really overpowered, so just because it's not as good as Ib doesn't mean it's not good. That's why it's only a probably. They might be able to unban the card and it would not be completely broken, but it would still be very strong. How could they fix Denglong, first of the Zings, to be unbanned? If they gave the restriction where it can only be synchro summoned with Zing monsters, that would fix the card overnight. You literally wouldn't have to change anything else about its +2 status or the fact that it can Foolish Burial as a cost, if you just made its requirements non-generic. The fact that it has generic requirements means it can be used in a whole bunch of different kinds of decks. If the requirements were specifically Zing, it could definitely be played to great advantage in Zing decks, but that would so heavily limit its potential that it would no longer just be very strong, and just be a strong option in a specific type of deck or engine. Because there are cards in the game which are very strong that are not problems in the meta, like Magical Musketeer Max, which is a Link 1 monster that can allow you to go +5 in card advantage. And I'm sure most of you have never even heard of this card, and that's because that advantage is only relevant within its archetype, which only occasionally sees competitive play because it's not generic. Next up, we have number 95, Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon. This is a rank 9 monster which can be special summoned by bringing it out on top of a Galaxy Eyes Xyz monster you control, and has the effect where, when it's summoned, you can send 3 Dragon-type monsters from your deck to the graveyard with different names in order to make your opponent banish 3 cards from their deck. And since it sends the monsters to the graveyard as a cost, your opponent can't actually negate the effect, which is the good part about this card. It also has the effect where it can be used as an Xyz material, and also you can detach one of its materials in order to allow it to attack 2 monsters during the battle phase. Now, what's really good about this card is definitely that mill effect, as there are a ton of really good dragon-type graveyard effects in the game, and Galaxy Eyes Matter Dragon does not have a once per turn on its effect. So I'll show you a quick little example of what it was capable of when the card first came out. With just 2 cards from your opening hand, you could easily get a full board of monsters, thanks to the Dragon Rulers and all other graveyard special summoning shenanigans. Although there are modern dragon cards which can special summon themselves in the graveyard too, although not to as great advantage as the Dragon Rulers could. Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon is kind of what finally got the Dragon Rulers banned, as it was just too much advantage of sending 3 of them to the graveyard on a card which was not once per turn. If you just brought out a Galaxy Eyes monster like normal, like number 107 Galaxy Eyes Tachyon Dragon for example, and you were able to special summon the card again later on, you could just rank up the other copies of Dark Matter Dragon on top of it in order to get its effect 3 times. Or even more if you're able to reset the card. Basically, Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon is really strong if you're able to use its effect a single time per turn. The fact that it's not once per turn is kind of broken, as only using the effect a single time is equivalent to going +3 in card advantage. And even though this thing is a crazy advantage machine on summon, it's also a 4000 attack beatstick that can attack twice, which is not the reason why this card is banned, but it is a definitely benefit to the card nonetheless. And what finally got Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon banned was when they released the Gar Dragon support, which made dragons even better, as you can see if you watched some of my previous videos on why Guard Dragon LP or Guard Dragon Aggro Pain are banned. Number 95 Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon was banned in April of 2019. Could number 95 Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon be unbanned? The answer to this question is probably no. It's basically a +3 on summon and doesn't have a once per turn on its effect. And it's real easy to summon, so you could theoretically go +9 if you brought it out 3 times. Although, even if the card is limited to 1 copy and you can only use the effect a single time, it's still really good and too easy to bring out. With one of the most supported types of cards in the game, as Konami loves to print new dragon support every chance they get. Even if they have already banned 5 dragon monsters with good graveyard effects, there are still a lot of others. How could number 95 Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon be fixed to be unbanned? If it simply banished the cards face down as its cost instead of sending them to the graveyard, that would do it. They wouldn't have to give it a once per turn if they did that. Alternatively, it could be changed to just have a hard once per turn on its mill effect, and also add restrictions to the dragons that sent to the graveyard, where they don't activate any effects the turn they're sent to the graveyard, and you can't use the effects of cards with the same name until the end of the turn. And also probably not make it a cost and part of the effect so it can be negated. This would allow you to set up the graveyard with specific dragons you want, just not ones with graveyard effects that you could use immediately. And lastly, we have Heavymetalfoes Electrumite. This is a Link 2 monster which just requires any 2 pendulum monsters as its materials, and has the effect that when it's Link summoned, you can add any pendulum monster from your deck to your extra deck face up. Once per turn, you can destroy a face up card you control in order to add a pendulum monster that's face up or in your extra deck to your hand. And its third effect is if a card in your pendulum zone leaves the field, you get to draw 1 card. So basically, Electrumite can allow you to add any pendulum card from your deck to your extra deck and then immediately add it to your hand while drawing a card. So it's a +2 in card advantage, or it's supposed to be only a +1, since you do have to destroy one of your pendulum cards in order to add that pendulum card to your hand. Unless you use this with one of the plethora of pendulum monsters that activate their effects on their destruction, like Double Iris Magician. Although, let's just assume you're not gaining advantage off the card you destroy. It is only a +1 in card advantage with all of its effects. However, the way it goes +1 is by allowing you to basically have any pendulum card in your hand that you want, and also allowing you to draw another card, and setting up your extra deck with another pendulum card when you destroy it with its effect. And its first 2 effects are only a soft once per turn, so if you bring out the other copies of Heavymetalfoes Electrumite, you can search out more pendulum cards. So on screen, I'll be showing the card being used to great effect with Astrograph Sorcerer, which is another pendulum card that is currently banned because it just allows you to get too much advantage, and was definitely abused with Heavymetalfoes Electrumite. Electrumite was kind of the card that was released in order to help pendulums when Link monsters are added to the game with the Master Rule 4 restrictions. For those of you who don't know how pendulums work, basically, you look at the number on the card located in the bottom left and right. Then, if you have 2 pendulum cards in the left and right spell and trap card zones, once per turn you can perform a pendulum summon, similar to how once per turn you get a normal summon for free. Then, with this pendulum summon, you can special summon any monster from your hand or face-up pendulum monsters in your extra deck to your monster zones, just as long as the targets you choose from your extra deck go to zones that either a Link monster is pointing to, or is the extra monster zone. Now, I'm sure current Yu-Gi-Oh fans already know this, but there are a surprising amount of people who watch these videos that don't actually play the game, and one of the #1 confusions I get in the comments is how pendulums work. And knowing how pendulums work is kind of important for explaining why Heavymetalfoes Electrumite is so good. Because you see, pendulums also go to your extra deck face up when they're destroyed on the field, instead of going to the graveyard. So, the cost of activating its effect to destroy a card you control, in order to add a pendulum card to your hand, isn't really a negative effect at all, and in fact is a huge plus to most pendulum decks. Especially since the card allows you to draw a card if you decide to destroy one of the cards in your pendulum zones to activate its +1 effect. And with 2 downward pointing arrows, it allows you to bring out 2 pendulum monsters from your extra deck with the pendulum summon by itself, without any other kind of cards, which is usually enough to perform a lot of pendulum plays. So Heavymetalfoes Electrumite is kind of like a band-aid, which fixes all of the problems pendulum cards have after Master Rule 4 kind of restricted them. As before Master Rule 4 and Link monsters, you could special summon as many pendulum monsters from your extra deck to any of the zones you wanted. Now they can only go to zones that Link monsters are pointing to or the extra monster zone. And Electrumite definitely helps that out, except it was too good at its job, because it was basically a +2 in card advantage with extra steps, and those extra steps were just playing competitive pendulum decks like normal. So originally they tried to rein in the effect of the card by banning Astrograph Sorcerer, so you can no longer gain huge pluses off its effect. Then limiting Heavymetalfoes to 1 copy, so you couldn't double up on its first 2 effects, which were not once per turn. Until eventually the Endymion archetype came out, and were just a really good pendulum archetype, which didn't necessarily take advantage of Heavymetalfoes Electrumite's effects as much as Astrograph Sorcerer did, but were just so good on their own that giving them a +2 with Heavymetalfoes Electrumite does make them even better, to the point where they just decided to ban the card, rather than allow pendulum decks to just have a really good support card. Because the ability to just search out any card from your archetype on summon, and also facilitating all of the plays they like to do like normal, while drawing an additional card, is good in pretty much any archetype. And being able to accomplish this with every single pendulum archetype is just a little bit too strong. Which is why the card was banned in January of 2020, very shortly after most of the Endymion cards were released in the TCG. Could Heavymetalfoes Electrumite be unbanned? The answer to this question is probably yes, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was unbanned sometime soon. Because you see, the card is really good, and is basically a +2 to every Pendulum deck. However, Pendulums were hit very hard by the Master Rule 4 restrictions, and they were the only extra deck type which was not unrestricted when they updated the rulings with the Master Rule revisions. So they're still playing by the original Master Rule 4 restrictions, and Heavymetalfoes Electrumite was released in order to help alleviate some of those heavy burdens. And because they still have those heavy restrictions, Pendulum decks don't really see as much competitive play. And one of the best ways they could support every Pendulum archetype at once would be just to release Heavymetalfoes Electrumite to 1 copy. Heavymetalfoes Electrumite is a very strong card, but it's not overpowered at 1 copy. And Konami is definitely fine with allowing very strong cards to exist in the game at 1 copy. Just take a look at Sky Striker Mobilize Engage. And the card is already at 1 copy in the OCG. Although, like I said earlier, the OCG is a lot different from the TCG, but even then they still have the same restrictions on Pendulum summoning. How could they fix Heavymetalfoes Electrumite to be unbanned? Well, firstly, they should slap the hard once per turn on all of its effects, instead of just its effect to draw a card. Alternatively, if they just change its materials to Heavymetalfoes monsters instead of any Pendulum monsters, they could probably unban the card without too much difficulties. The Heavymetalfoes Pendulum cards are actually pretty good within other Pendulum archetypes, so it still might see play, but having basically generic materials in a Pendulum deck just makes it too strong. So it could be like a Denglong situation, where they could easily fix the card by just making it restricted to the archetype it actually belongs to. As Heavymetalfoes Electrumite is supposed to be a Heavymetalfoes card, but it's also just the best Pendulum support card in the game. Alright, and that's the video. There's only one more video before I finish every banned extra deck monster, and then I'll start on all the other main deck monsters to finish off the series.